Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Crime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the first of many standalone videos in our coverage of the Roman Catholic Church. This one is by popular demand. I was only planning to do a kind of a standalone video on the Emperor Constantine, but the demand for the Emperor Nero kind of overwhelmed that. So because Nero came first in history, I'm going to do Nero first. The next video will be on Constantine, and then we will delve into the second part of the overall Roman Catholic history video with the Dark Ages through the Renaissance. So that's what's on docket for the next week or two. Now, before we delve in, I want to give a huge shout out to my subscribers, patrons, channel members. Could not do this without you, and I truly, truly love you all. Thank you. That being said, let's dive into Nero. To understand Nero, you first have to go back and kind of look at where he fell in reference to the Roman Empire, his reaction to the Christians, or early Catholics, as they like to claim, as well as other political, socio-economic factors to really understand why Nero is important to mention in early church or Catholic history. He was one of the, probably the most heralded emperor as being abusive and persecuting the early Christians, and it is also alleged through many reliable sources that the book of Revelation, written by John the Antichrist, mentioned in that is also referring to Nero. So, yeah, a lot of stuff. But to really understand Nero and probably what his mindset was and what his motivations might have been, you have to go back a whole lot further to two other Roman emperors, both relatives of his, that is Caligula and Claudius. Now, Caligula is also known as one of the more mad Roman emperors, having tortured both his subjects and others, and it's also ironic that he was a relative of Nero, as was Claudius. Now, the entire Nero line, he was part of the Judeo-Augustan line, which means he had a direct descendancy from Augustus Caesar, who was the first emperor of the Roman Empire, as well as to Julius Caesar, who was, I guess, the first proposed emperor of the Roman Empire. But that is the family that Nero came from, though it's not as straightforward as all of that. But to really understand, we have to go back a little bit further with Claudius. Let's jump into that. Now, the family of Julius Caesar, and by default Augustus Caesar, who was his grandnephew, or great nephew as it would be determined in our day and age, the whole family tree is a little bit muddled. There's a lot of intermarrying, there's a lot of adoption, there's a lot of remarrying of widows, and so it gets a little bit confusing to understand where the first 4 or 5 emperors of the Roman Empire actually came from. But I'm going to do my best to break it down for you. Let's first start with Julius Caesar himself. Julius Caesar, as we know, was a famed military general, part of a threesome that essentially kind of ruled Rome along with the Republic in the final days of the Republic, along with Mark Antony and Cassius. Now, Caesar was quite revered for helping to shape the Roman Empire before it entered its golden age under Augustus, and was basically had been offered dictator for life, other things, but always turned it down. So he was never an official emperor of the Roman Empire, but was instrumental in the Republic giving way to a monarchy. Now, he had one daughter named Julia, and no legitimate sons, even though he had a son with Cleopatra of Egypt, known as Caesarion, or Little Caesar, Ptolemy Caesar. He had no natural-born Roman citizen sons that the Republic would have recognized. And as a result, his great-nephew, or great-grandnephew, Octavian, he actually ended up adopting him and therefore becoming an adopted son. And Octavian, after dealing with Mark Antony and Cleopatra and even little Caesarion, who he had strangled at a very young age, he became Julius Caesar's heir apparent, and eventually rose and became the first emperor of the Roman Empire under the name Augustus Caesar. Before taking up with Cleopatra, Mark Antony had married Augustus Caesar, or Octavian's sister, Octavia Minor. And it is from this line that the first of the other 2 emperors we need to briefly mention came from. That is Claudius. Now, from the line of Mark Antony and Augustus's sister Octavia came eventually Claudius's mother, Antonia Minor, and it was from that line that the Emperor Claudius was born. It is also rumored that Augustus Caesar, who had remarried several times — a lot of these emperors will have a huge history of remarrying and marrying, having concubines and everything else — but Augustus's 3rd wife, Livia, was also his paternal grandmother. So Claudius himself had huge ties to the family of Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. But Claudius himself was born on August 1st, 10 BC, or before Common Era, at what is now Lyon, France. He had 2 older brothers, Germanicus and Livilla. Now, Germanicus would go on to be a hugely popular general in the Roman Empire, and would be the father to the other infamous emperor we have to look at to really understand Nero, and that was Caligula. Now, Claudius, from the time he was born, had some sort of malady that basically made him, in the eyes of his very aristocratic family, a drooling imbecile. He drooled on himself. He couldn't walk well. He couldn't speak well. And a lot of the members of his family just automatically wrote him off. In fact, many historians say that he would have been killed in an early form of Roman eugenics if it had not been that he was a member of the royal family, and that would have been more controversial than just to raise him as somebody that would always be cared for by someone else. Except when he was about 7 or 8, the old Emperor Augustus took a liking to him and realized, okay, this is my sort of great-grandson. Let me make sure that he has everything that he needs. He took a liking to him, noticed that he was very much into art and music, and things of that nature, and basically got him one of the more famous writers, poets of the era as his tutor. And basically, people started to take notice. Hey, Claudius is kind of smart, kind of wily. He may not be in a very athletic standard. He may not be outwardly, a great orator, but he's got some smarts, and he so grew up in a very privileged way. And after the death of Augustus Caesar, Augustus Caesar's adopted son Tiberius became emperor. Now, Tiberius was another tyrant among tyrants. He killed off huge swaths of the aristocrats, huge swaths of anyone that he thought had committed. In fact, he would have random trials and accuse random citizens of basically being a traitor and drown them. I mean, he was a monster among monsters, as both Caligula and Nero would turn out to be. So, as a result of this, Claudius was often spared from the purge of the aristocrats because Tiberius considered him a fool. Considered him, oh, he's no threat to me. So he was spared. Now, his brother Manicus died in battle in great honor for the empire, and his son Caligula was also spared because Tiberius had a certain affection for the young man. And basically, both Claudius and Tiberius were taken to an island palace that Tiberius owned and were basically humiliated for sport, chastised, tortured, whatever, as being fools, and just completely controlled by Tiberius, until Caligula had his bait of it and smothered the old emperor in his sleep one night. And it was at that time that Caligula and his wily, now remember, this is Claudius's nephew by his brother Germanicus, basically got the Praetorian Guard, which is the royal guard of the emperor. Think of them as, in Star Wars, it would be the red-clad guards. They were highly renowned among the empire, and so they basically crowned young Caligula emperor after Tiberius died in his sleep, though most historical people agree that Caligula murdered him in his sleep. And then, of course, began the famous reign of Caligula, with all the incest and murder and weirdness that it encapsulated. And he, like everyone else, kind of underestimated old Uncle Claudius and did not purge him out in the many, many more purges of the aristocracy. Among the purges that took place during the very, very tortured reign of Caligula was his own sister, Agrippina the Younger, who he accused of treason and had exiled, along with her husband, a well-known politician of the time, Gnaeus Demetrius Anabarbus, to an island. And it was on that island, on December 15th, 37, Common Era or AD, that the major subject of this video, Nero, was born under the name Lucius Domitius Anabarbus. And Nero was the great-nephew of the Emperor Claudius and the nephew of the Emperor Caligula, as well as a great descendant of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, and Augustus Caesar. So, it was on that island that young Nero was born under exile with his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Now, Agrippina is well noted as being the architect of Nero's rise to power, having been cheated out of what she thought was her birthright by her brother Caligula, she sought revenge, and if she would eventually get her wish through her son. Now, while young Nero was growing up, it was noted he had a fascination for the arts and for um, acting anything other than being a politician like his father and his wily mother. Now, while he was growing up, Caligula controlled the family while they were exiled and basically would not allow him an actual proper tutor. Instead, had him tutored by dancers and actors, which at that time in ancient Rome, they were considered kind of the lowest. They're right above brothels, people that work in brothels, and I'll just leave it at that, in the hierarchy of the time. So even in his education, little Nero was kind of spit upon because of his mother. Now, outside the little Mediterranean island, you had the very tyrannical rule of Caligula, which took a really dark turn toward the last part after he suffered an illness. And if you want a video on Caligula, I'll be happy to do that. But let's just say he's a little cray-cray. And eventually, some politicians, as well as his own Praetorian Guard, decided to dispatch him outside in public, kind of like Julius Caesar outside some Colosseum gang. January 24th, 41 Common Era or AD, he was assassinated, like I said, in broad daylight. And the Senate kind of took over, and it was rumored that at that point that they would probably try to reinstate the old republic. Kind of sounds like Star Wars, doesn't it? But, however, you had the Praetorian Guard, who feared this happening because their prestige, their power would be gone if it reverted to a republic. So they decided, who can we designate as the proper emperor before this happens? Now, in reality, they couldn't have stopped it, but the Senate was so divided, kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it, that nothing could get done. So while the assassination of Caligula was going on, as well as the assassination of his wife and daughter, that same day, they were searching the royal palace for any member of the royal family that might be left. And who was left? Old crazy Uncle Claudius, who it's rumored that a member of the Praetorian Guard found hiding behind a curtain and declared him the proper Roman emperor because they wanted a member of the Julian Augustan dynasty, but somebody that was perceived as weak that they could control, so they would actually be in charge. And so they paraded him to the Senate and declared him the emperor, and I think at that point Rome was just like, okay, whatever, he's an idiot, but okay, whatever. And Claudius was crowned emperor. He decided at that point to try to right some of the wrongs that Caligula had done, and he basically freed Nero's family from exile. And Nero, his mom, his siblings all returned to Rome. In AD 49, Claudius, for the first 8 years of his reign, he did a lot of great things for the empire. He corrected a lot of the bad things that Caligula had done. He kind of restored, a confidence in the monarchy, and was actually doing an okay job, but he had one big weakness. He was a bit of a womanizer, but not a wily womanizer. He let his women control him. It's rumored that one of his wives cheated on him so often that she actually had a bet with a well-known prostitute of the day as to who could bed the most men in one day, and she won. She even legally married another man behind his back. So let's say he wasn't the smartest when it came to women. I believe there's a term for that today that I won't use, but that's what he was. And as a result, Agrippina, Nero's mom, was determined to get her birthright back. So what did she do? She basically seduced her uncle, Claudius. Remember, this is the daughter of his older brother Germanicus, into marrying her. And he did. And she also manipulated him into adopting all of her children, including Nero. So Nero, now an adopted son, and within the view of Romans, adopted son was just as legitimate as an actual son. So now Nero is the oldest son of Emperor Claudius, and according to Roman tradition would be the immediate heir to the throne. Now, the young Nero wanted nothing to do with being emperor or public life. His mother kind of forced him into it. He would have much rather been an actor. But in the year 51, Common Era, AD, he was forced in at the age of 14 to taking his place in Roman society as well as politics, and did it ever begrudgingly. Now, of course, Agrippina wanted to solidify their claim to the throne. She was not satisfied that Nero would only be a joint heir with the biological son of Claudius, called Britannicus. So she wanted to solidify him. So she forced him to marry his stepsister, Claudia Octavia, the daughter of Claudius, to cement his claim on the throne, therefore edging out the very young Britannicus. Now, he did it very begrudgingly. Now, Octavia was, of all accounts, a society woman. She had morals, she had standards, and this did not sit right with Nero, who would prefer to drink beer and carouge with, prostitutes and actors and everybody else. I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm just saying he's kind of rough around the edges. And he was kind of forced into that marriage, and from all accounts was not a happy marriage at all, but what are children if not political pawns? In 54 AD, Claudius died under mysterious circumstances, though most historians say he was poisoned by Agrippina, who bribed his taster to slip him poisonous mushrooms. Now, let's think about the position that young taster was in. He knows that the old emperor's kind of weak. He knows that when he passes, it's probably going to be Nero that takes over. Nero is under the thumb of Agrippina, so of course he's going to do it to protect his own self. And he did, and Claudius died. Now, at that very moment, he had barely hit the ground when Agrippina took Nero, who was, by that time, an adult, and marched him to the Praetorian Guard and had them declare him emperor without even considering young Britannicus, who was eventually poisoned and killed by Nero himself to solidify his hold on the throne. For what we know, the early part of his reign, which his reign lasted from 50 Common Era to 68 AD or Common Era, was actually pretty good. He put a lot of reforms into place. He did well. He expanded the empire just a little bit. He made some good decisions when it came to money, always under the tutelage of his mother Agrippina, who also had her own image placed on a Roman coin of the day. Now, in addition to not being very happy with his current wife, he also had a number of affairs, and also went out and performed at local theaters, sometimes under the guise of a woman. Now, doing that in the form of being a thespian was very common in the Roman Empire, so didn't really mean anything. But it still wasn't really done for the emperor, but still. He began having an affair with a woman named Poppaea, and Agrippina wasn't having it. Because she wanted him to stay with his current wife, and that started to cause a rift between mother and son. And finally, the whole tension, the fact he had been under his mother's thumb his entire life, not really wanting to go into politics, finally Nero kind of cracked and began to see his mother as a traitor, and by 59 AD or Common Era, Nero had had about enough of his mother, and he actually had her barge rigged to shipwreck and sink. But unfortunately for him, she did survive the attack, and he just sent a platoon of Praetorian guards to stab her to death. And it is noted that when she realized what was going on, she asked to be stabbed in her womb, saying that this is where the traitor was nurtured, or something along those lines. But let's just say she kind of saw it coming. So he killed his mother. As you can say, that did not make him very popular with the mothers of the day, and neither did the fact that by 62 Common Era or AD, he had also murdered his wife Octavia. Actually, he made her commit suicide so that he could marry his lover Pompeia. And none of that made him very popular with the Roman gentry. Now, here's where we really see Nero starting to descend into madness, much like his predecessors Caligula and Claudius Tiberius. He had an evil streak in him. Probably the most well-known thing is on the nights of July 18 to 19 and 64 Common Era or AD, the famous Great Fire of Rome, which basically took out most of Rome as it existed at that time. Was mostly of wood without any interconnecting systems. It wasn't the grand Rome that we know today. It was the first Rome. And many people rumored that he ordered it done, or, something along those lines, to make room for a giant palace that he wanted built. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know, but that is the rumor. And the old rumor about him fiddling while Rome burnt, not true. He wasn't even in the city. He was 35 miles away at another estate that he owned. But, of course, people were out for blood. In fact, Nero opened up his own existing palace to Romans that were displaced by the fire. So he kind of used it as a PR stunt. Sounds familiar. Many of our presidents have done the same thing. So basically, it was kind of a status quo. But what he did do is blame a troublesome Jewish cult known as the Christians for the fire. And it was from this time, 64, until his death in 68, that the large-scale persecutions of the early Christians began. He would torture them into confessing to the fire, or confessing into some sort of treason, and then kill them in very murderous way, from beheading to crucifixion to drowning to making them face lions and gladiators in the Colosseum. So everything you've ever heard about the persecution of the Christians under Nero is absolutely true. And many people believe that John, who was actually exiled to Patmos during this time, probably based the Antichrist and Revelations on Nero. In addition to the torture of the Christians, he did rebuild Rome in much more grand style, including his dream palace. But as a result, he was running out of royal money. And how do you get royal money? You tax people to death. So he started ordering more taxes all across the empire. People don't like that. So his popularity with the people was really starting to wane. In 65 AD, in a fit of madness, he killed his wife Pompeia, who was pregnant, with their second child, by kicking her in the stomach, killing both her and the unborn baby. And after this, he actually had her body taxidermied and placed in a mausoleum where he could go visit her at any time. He also had a young 13-year-old boy named Sporus, who bared a striking resemblance to his late wife, castrated and made him dress like his former wife. And he actually did marry the young boy in a ceremony and basically abused the young boy the rest of his life, at least the rest of Nero's life, because his days were numbered from this point. In March of 68 AD, Common Era, he sent Vindex, who was the governor of Gaul, and basically asked him to again raise taxes for some projects. He said no, and basically declared himself in revolt against the Emperor Nero. Other governors eventually joined the rebellion, even though Vindex was killed in May of 68 AD, or Common Era, in the Battle of Bisontio. It did light a fire of rebellion against Nero, and you had several other outlying governors declare rebellion and set themselves up as emperor. And this, in addition to the fact that Nero basically deserted the city of Rome to go on a tour of the Eastern Empire, where he was much revered because of some of making them independent city-states and other things that made Rome very unhappy. His whole demeanor with the Western Empire started to crumble, and as a result, June 9th, 68 AD or Common Era, a group of Roman soldiers was sent to dispatch Nero at a nearby cottage where he was staying near Rome. But Nero, upon seeing them coming, knew what was going on, and he asked his servants who were with him to kill him. None of them would. He was famously screamed, "Not a friend or an enemy when I need them," along those lines. And he eventually commandeered a sword, stabbing himself. And as he died, he screamed famously, "What an artist dies in me." And he was also rumored to have told the soldiers once they entered and saw him dying, "Oh, too late," kind of a final FU to his enemies he dispatched. And from there, you have Rome entering what is known as the period of, or the year of the four emperors, where four different people, generals, started to take over, and Rome didn't fare so well. So this was the end of the Julio-Claudian or Julio-Augustan dynasty. It was the last of the emperors descended from Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar to rule. The rest of them would be generals, politicians that would take over and their lines. And if you, like I said, I'm more than willing to do a study of all the emperors at some point if you'd like, but this is the story of Nero. He was, you know, he was just as bad as we've heard when it comes to persecuting Christians, but he did not fiddle while Rome burnt, but he was still a madman. And it often makes me wonder what would have happened if his mother hadn't have manipulated him so much, but probably never know that. But I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back next time with a much more peaceful, sane emperor under Constantine. And we will see you then. Until next time, Keto and Krime.